Hello everybody, this is Tip Top MTG here today with another MTG Arena video. In today's video, I'm going to be looking at the green color challenge for MTG Arena and kind of breaking down every level. So I'm going to first go over what you need to do to actually beat the level step by step, and along the way I'm going to talk about what the lesson is trying to teach you. The color challenge is one of the best ways to learn how to play Magic, and just looking at a step-by-step really doesn't do it justice, so I'll be trying to kind of emphasize the lessons that each stage has. On top of that, if you're only having trouble on, say, one particular part of it, there are timestamps both on screen, in the description, and there's also them on the little YouTube search bar for each color challenge. So if you're only having trouble with, say, green versus white, you can just go straight to that battle. Alright, I think that's it, so why don't we jump right into this. So starting off, we have green versus white. Now, white generally likes to have lots of small little creatures and to gain a bunch of life. Green likes to get lots of mana and get huge creatures out, which, I mean, they're both really good at fighting each other. Green generally has trample, which means that a bunch of small creatures don't really matter to it. But white has a lot of creatures, which means that having one big creature isn't super important there. So it's a pretty fair matchup. Generally, but like I said, green though is going to want to ramp, which is essentially getting more mana than you're kind of supposed to. Think about it. On turn 1, you can play 1 land, which means you should have 1 mana. Now let's say you draw a land every turn, and on turn 5, you should have 5 mana. But green will play cards that will let it have access to 6 mana on turn 5, and that is called a ramp. So if you ever hear anyone talking about it, that's what they're talking about. Now, in this fight against white, you'll notice that ramp is very important to be able to get ahead of our opponent, and so why don't we actually just jump right into the gameplay so that I can kind of break it down. So yeah, looking at the gameplay, we have green versus white. So in our hand, we have 2 cards that let us ramp, a pretty good blocker, that being a 3/3, and another blocker which will boost our 3/3. If you guys don't know what the pack hunters do, they boost each other when they enter the battlefield. So when the other one enters, it'll make the original one bigger. It's pretty awesome. It's an interesting kind of synergy. I don't know how powerful it really is outside of this, but basically, at this point, you kind of just want to play the creatures in your hand. This one isn't super order dependent. The one thing to note is that our ramper, like I talked about earlier, the one that gives you more mana, if we have a creature with power 4 or greater, it gives us more mana. So there is a little bit of a sequencing thing here. Yes, you could have played the Ilson-Cariad first, but then you wouldn't have gotten the 5 power creature. And if you didn't have the 5 power creature, you would have been 1 mana short of casting both. So it is a little bit about spending your mana in the right way. Now that Ilson-Cariad doesn't really need to be here, simply because next turn we can still cast the only card in our hand. Now our opponent does something here which is triple blocking, which, you might think, oh, that sucks, but, trading one of our creatures for 3 of theirs is pretty decent, especially when we have our Brontodon, which is going to get huge really quickly. But yeah, this battle is very simple. Green is probably one of the most simple colors to play. It's basically just get mana, play big creatures, win. You don't have to worry about first strike or combat boost or any of that. And so I think it's a really great color if you're looking to build your own deck to build first. Just pick some cards that ramp you up and some really big creatures. Now, we do win here. We do get a 13/13 with trample. And so what is this lesson trying to teach you? Now, obviously, it's trying to teach you about trample. That is the main thing here. It's saying that, hey, yeah, you can have a 13/13, but as long as they have some small creatures, that doesn't matter. But with trample, it makes it so, yeah, your opponent's blockers basically only block the amount of power that their toughness is. So if you have a 10/10 trampler and they have a 5/5, well, and they block, normally if it wasn't a trampler, they would take no damage. But here, your creature will deal the 5 damage to the blocker and then deal an additional 5 damage to you, which is just utterly powerful because it lets you get around having lots of small little blockers that keep just blocking your big creatures. The other thing it kind of teaches you is a little bit more about ramping, and more importantly, sequencing your plays, making sure you understand your cards. If you can play a 5-drop that makes your land or your creature tap for 1 additional mana, and then you can use that 1 additional mana to play something else, well, it makes sense to do it in that order, not the other way around. So yeah, that's the basis of that one. Why don't we move right into the next one? The next one is green versus red. Red is generally a really fast color, so you're probably either going to beat it quickly or not. A good way to deal with red is to play enough big creatures to just block all their little guys. They're generally going to have a lot of small creatures similar to white, and so having creatures that can deal with that is really important. Now, we can just jump right into the gameplay. There's not too much to talk about here. Red and green are both fairly simple colors that both just kind of have combat-based strategies generically. Now, by the way, whenever I say in any of these color guide challenges that green does this, that does not mean that it only does this. Green, yes, does play big creatures, but green can also play into other strategies as well. Just for the purpose of, these decks, that's what they generally do. But that's not super important for this matchup, so why don't we jump right into the gameplay? Alrighty, so jumping right into this gameplay, green versus red, you'll notice that in our hand we have a pretty expensive hand, which isn't great against a mono red deck, because like I said, they want to win quickly. So we do have a 2-drop, but generally you never really want to block with your ramp. It's something that you are going to want to kind of keep around. Now, we also get Stony Strength, which is an interesting card. It first allows us to untap creatures, it allows us to put counters on things at instant speed. It's just a really nice card, and you'll see some interesting applications for it later. But comparing this to the green versus white, it is very similar in the fact that you're just trying to ramp to bigger things. Now we have a 3/3, which means they can't comfortably swing with their 1/1 or 2/2. Now, they could swing with their 2/2, and then, say, kill our ramp, which is very important, because, by the way, their Spellgorger Weird gets bigger the more spells they cast. So it's this weird dynamic of knowing what to block. For instance, if they would have swung with their 3/3, there was a high chance I wouldn't have blocked it. Here, I'm using my own combat trick to try and win this little fight here, but oftentimes with Spellgorger Weird, any instant and sorcery, one that you wouldn't even think of, one that just says draw a card, now just boost him out of nowhere. It turns all instants into combat tricks. So being careful about different types of blockers and understanding your opponent's cards is really important. Now, we have Illincariad and a 4/4, which is an interesting little combo with Stony Strength, because Stony Strength will allow us to untap a creature for 1 mana, but Illincariad taps for 2, which means that we can kind of use it as a one-time ramp spell that also boosts our Illincariad, because we tap it for 2 green, use 1 of the green for Stony Strength, then we can tap it for 2 more green, and now we got 3 green from our card, and put a counter on Illincariad. There's all sorts of really awesome things you can do here. Now, saving stone. Now, we are playing against a red deck, and one thing to note about Stony Strength is that it does boost the power of our creatures, the toughness of our creatures by 1, which is important because red kills creatures by doing damage. So if they have a spell that does exactly 4 damage, or exactly 2, you can boost them. So here, I use Stony Strength to untap it, then use the mana from untapping it to put more counters on it to save our ramp. It's a, kind of complex play. You might look at it originally and say, oh, I can only boost it once. But being able to look ahead a couple of plays is really important in Magic. And why that's so important? Well, if we didn't save our ramp, we wouldn't be able to cast our 7/7 right here. And if we didn't cast that, we risk them finding some sort of solution. Now, one thing I'm not a huge fan about this color challenge is that you're almost constantly winning in this matchup, which isn't super realistic. Most of the time, the power switches between players throughout the match. But here, that doesn't seem to be much of the case. So here, I decided to just kind of swing because that's what's happening. They block poorly, and it makes them lose the game. I don't know if they could have survived. I don't think they could have, but yeah. That's overall green versus red. It's a very simple fight, and honestly, I would say most green decks are fairly simple mono green decks in the fact that they just want to play creatures and swing, and their creatures are generally going to be bigger than everyone else's, so they're going to have an easier time swinging. The lessons that one is trying to teach you is be careful of combat tricks and use combat tricks. I mean, think about how differently that battle could have gone if I didn't save my Illincariad with the Stony Strength. If I would have just said, oh, I can only boost its power or toughness by 2, not realizing that it untaps, allowing us to get more mana, we may not have ever gotten to our big dino, or if we did, may have been too late. We may have already died. So being able to sequence those plays in the correct order is also really important, and understanding how your cards synergize. So why don't we jump right into the next one? So the next one is green versus blue, which is, blue is generally a more interactive color. It'll stop your stuff from ever happening. It'll return things back to your hand. It has more, I would say, tricks up its sleeve than something like green. And so in this battle, it is actually probably one of the harder ones for green, in the fact that there are multiple options. Unlike the previous ones where it's basically just cast the best thing in your hand, this one has multiple options. Do you cast the best thing in your hand? Do you boost up your Jungle Delver? And we're going to jump into all of that here in a second. So just so you know the opponent's deck, this mono blue deck cares a lot about flyers, just so you know. So in our hand, we have Jungle Delver, Illisin, and Stony Strength. Now, obviously I skipped over the Rampaging Brontodon. That's just because it's so far away. At this point, it is basically play the best thing in your hand. Play your 1-drop, play your 2-drop. But next turn, we'll run into an interesting option. Do we play the Colossal Majesty, which will let us draw extra cards if we have a big enough creature, or do we use Jungle Delver's ability to make it bigger? Well, there are good options for both. The Colossal Majesty lets us keep that spend that mana now, so in the future we don't have to. But when we play it, it's doing nothing. Sure, it looks like a cool card, but it doesn't do anything. But by boosting up our Jungle Delver, we can both avoid this damage, and we can slowly build up to having a 4-power creature, so our Colossal Majesty will be better. Now, what we can do is we can actually speed that process up using Stony Strength. Now, this is an instant, so you can save it for whenever you want to use it. For instance, if your opponent expects it to only be a 2/2, which they probably shouldn't, saying that you can boost it for 4 mana and you have 4 mana, then, your opponent might make bad decisions. That's something that I don't know how well the tutorial really tells you this, but something I will recommend. Instants, cast them at instant speed as long as your opponent isn't playing a lot of counter spells. That's like the one exception. But you'll notice here now Colossal Majesty makes a lot of sense. I mean, we don't really need it to block anything anymore. We still have the Stony Strength up. We could technically cast another Colossal Majesty, but I'm keeping Stony Strength here just in case something happens. And what we want to do is we want to be able to gain value. Now our 3-cost enchantment, it does not do nothing. And I think that's something really important this lesson teaches you is, hey, you can... making sure you're doing things in the right order and not wasting mana early. So now that we have, that thing, we're drawing extra cards. That means we're going to have extra, just cards in hand. And what I do here is I decide to attack. At least that's what I should do, but I decide not to attack, actually. So what the correct play there is to attack, and then if they block with a 4/4, you boost up your 4/4 into a 5/5, and then they lose their creature. That's the correct play there. Apparently, I misplayed. But yeah, this is very much about sequencing. Actually, you'll notice that we're about to lose, so maybe that last play would have, not worked well. And so you have to kind of do the math here. I think this one's really about thinking ahead, thinking about blockers. I need to be able to kill them this turn or I am dead. Well, trample means that I have to care about how much toughness my opponent's creatures have. So let's get rid of the thing with the biggest toughness. And then we need every ounce of damage, so even the Illisin is being swung, because if they waste blocking the 1/1, well then they lose. But we do have Stony Strength, which means that we can boost up our creatures if we need to. For instance, if they would have blocked the 4/4 like they should have, because it blocks more damage, we had the Stony Strength in order to actually win the game. So yeah, that one really is teaching you about when to play your spells. Yes, you can play your spell now, but why? Would it be better to invest that in the board state in a different way that would be more beneficial in the long run? And so yeah, that's what that one is trying to teach you. It's a fairly simple one, but it does require a little bit more planning ahead than, say, just playing the best creature in your hand. So our next battle is green versus black. So black is generally one of the enemies of green in the fact that green likes to play really big creatures, but black has spells that just say destroy target creature. So in this matchup, we really have to worry about that. And we do know from our opponent's deck that they have lots of kill spells for small creatures as well, which is threatening to our ramp. So, this fight is going to be a little bit more challenging, so why don't we jump into it? Alright, so moving into green versus black, you'll notice our hand is somewhat slower, but we do have some ramp, we have some removal, and we have some big creatures, which is kind of everything green wants. We have enough lands to get up to our, our Baloth Pack Hunter. Our opponent does play something kind of scary, that being this guy, and that's because this guy will allow him to get really big really fast. And since our removal and how green's removal works is based on your creatures, getting rid of it early is really important. Now, they do have this 1/1 Death Toucher, which is also really bad for us because we could have this 20/20 and then they block it with 1 Death Toucher and it's dead. So what I decided to do is not kill anything with Rabid Bite, just because I don't like using the last removal spell in my hand on a 1/1. I'd rather save it for something that maybe is unblockable to us, like a 1/1 Flyer. So I decided to play Baloth Pack Hunter, which boosts up our other 1 to a 5/5, which then gives Ilson Carrier the ability to tap for 2. So it's very similar to green versus white, where, you want to make sure that you're playing your Pack Hunters before you use the mana from Cariad to ensure that you are getting the most efficiency. Yes, you're not going to tap that 1 green mana, but your opponent doesn't know that. Having 1 mana and being tapped out to your opponent is wildly different. We could have Stony Strength, which will boost up our creatures, so now they have to plan around the idea that maybe we could boost up our creatures. Now, there you could probably have played the Ink Drid or the Rampaging Brontodon. It may have made sense to play the Rampaging Brontodon, but I figured, you know what, let's just get rid of his creatures while we can also just swing through for 8. Sometimes playing the slower route is sometimes better. Now, they do get this 1/1, which is really irritating. So, here the Rampaging Brontodon is better. Yes, it costs more. Yes, it's only a 7/7 compared to a 10/10, but Trample means that 1/1 Death Toucher won't kill us. Now, what they do is they block our 5/5, which I don't know if that's exactly the correct move on their part. They are trying to survive, so I guess. But then they swing with both their 1/1s because they're basically dead unless they have a kill spell, and they get a kill spell. So this is kind of what I said earlier. Black is the, bane of green. But luckily, we didn't invest everything into the board. If we would have maybe played the Gigantosaurus and the Brontodon, well, then they would have maybe known to, hey, let's save a Death Toucher for the 10/10 and the kill spell for the 7/7. Now, they do have that, but we get Prized Unicorn, which basically says everything has to block it. So if we swing with it, everything else is guaranteed to get through. So going into it, we swing, and they have to block with everything, which not only means that we can kill things if we want, so I put the 2 1/1 Death Touchers in front just in case they have some weird combat trick, and then what do you call it? And then all of our creatures get through. So yeah, again, kind of just let's swing and win that way. Unlike white, like the white color challenges that required you to use complex like combat mechanics, green is very much I'm going to win with creatures, and that's pretty awesome. And it's all about sequencing. I would say most of the lessons here are sequence your plays in the right order. Play your Baloth before you tap your mana. Know what's going to happen during combat. Be able to predict what your opponent is going to block with. Maybe deal with some Death Touchers in that very same way. So yeah, that's it for the green versus black. And it's also not just it for green versus black, that's it for this video. So if you guys enjoyed, please hit that like button, subscribe, and check out some of my other content. When this video is released, all the other color challenge guides will be out, so if you need any of those, check the description for a link to the full playlist so you can, check any of them that you want. I also do awesome content with custom Magic. I talk about news, I talk about standard, historic, and just all things Magic the Gathering. So if you think you'd enjoy that, check out the rest of my stuff. And again, if you liked this video, hit that like button, maybe share it with a friend. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.